Welcome everybody to the HX in Uncertainty show. My name is Ashley Reichheld, and I have spent the last 20 years or so, and that makes me feel old to say out loud, studying experience, and in particular, how people's emotions and values connect to what they actually do. And we are delighted tonight to invite you to our values session. And with me, I have two of my colleagues, Maggie and Ayo. Perhaps you could introduce yourselves.
Yes, happy to go. Hello, everyone. My name is Ayo Odusote, and I predominantly work with clients in the tech space, most of them selling kind of their products and services business to business, and especially those that are selling through partners or intermediaries. And I advise my clients on sales, channel, operations, experience, and strategy. And I'm really glad to be here. Been really intrigued about this whole story of kind of the human values, and I'm really excited about being part of this conversation.
We're excited to have you.
Yeah.
And I'm Maggie Gross. Nice to not see all of you, but I see we have a bunch of participants on. I'm a brand, digital, and comms strategist, really by trade, but I sit in Deloitte's kind of advertising practice and division. And I'm here for a couple reasons, I think. Like, empathy is my superpower, and I am also a nerd who really wanted a way to combine empathy and math and get better insights. And so I developed something called the Values Compass, which we'll talk a little bit about in the session, but really to sort of assess what motivates people and groups and ultimately reach their values.
Perfect. Well, thanks both for joining. Maggie, I want to go straight away to the Values Compass, but just really quickly before we do that, for those who are joining for the first time tonight or haven't heard the words human experience, I thought we could introduce that really quickly. We set out an aspiration to elevate the human experience about 2 years ago. In doing so, transitioning from focusing on one human or another to thinking about all the humans in the ecosystem. My favorite Maggie coined phrase is you don't wake up every day as a customer, you don't wake up as an employee, you wake up as a human. So we set out to elevate the experience for all the humans in our ecosystem, including customers, including partners, including workforce. We have spent a lot of time researching and trying to understand how to make experience better. And one of the things that became apparent to us as we were doing this work is that we as humans aren't rational creatures. The choices we make on a daily basis, 80% of which are driven by emotion, are really linked to our values as human beings. So if you want to deeply understand human experience, you have to understand values, which are at the core of how we feel. And how we feel is at the core of how we act. So in order to really deeply understand humans, we decided to study values more specifically. And Maggie, as the author of the Values Compass, perhaps you can tell us a little bit more about how you created it and what it is.
Yeah. I think a key thing, again, is that real desire for data-driven insights. A lot of times strategists focus either on sort of qual or quant. I don't think either is necessarily better than the other, but I always really like to have a little bit of quantitative data to check my math and make sure stuff I'm hearing is more than just anecdotes. So the sort of desire for those data-driven insights is really what drove me to want to make the Values Compass, which is this sort of crazy mad scientist way of describing a proprietary algorithm that sort of identifies what motivates a group of people's behaviors, actions, and beliefs. It's rooted in sort of scientific and academic research sources, but essentially gets us to 25 key questions that we can ask somebody and actually identify what motivates their behaviors and actions. And it has really big implications for how organizations can succeed when they want to engage with those folks. When they know that what they really value, they can actually start to make like more effective brand messages, more connected sort of experiences, and ultimately more protected value across their ecosystem.
Yeah, Mike, I think I learned about the values work that you're doing, and I was really intrigued, and the work that Ashley has been doing around elevating the human experience. And I thought, how does this, or how can this apply to B2B customers, or B2B companies, those selling through partners or other intermediaries? And it got me thinking about that. And you kind of think about businesses and the fact that businesses are human. They're created by humans, they are run by humans. And I think also often we forget that in terms of how we design, how we engage with them, or how we interact with them. I think it's time to put the human back in business. And that's what I've set out to do. And I will talk a little bit more about that over the course of the day, about what that means. What does it mean to think about values in the context of B2B and in the context of partners? And I'll just mention now that when we talk about partners, and when I talk about partners, it's kind of the intermediaries through which companies sell with, sell through, create with. And it could vary whichever sector you're in. In the tech sector, you have partners that help you implement your services. Or you take in the auto industry, you have dealers, those are partners. And the partners are your brand ambassadors in many situations. Now, what I've found, and I actually talked about kind of the customer, the employee, and the partner, there's a lot of focus on the customer and employee. The partner is often the third wheel, often forgotten. I think that there should be focus on the partners because they're your brand ambassadors. And if you create a great experience for your partners, if you understand their values, it can translate into growth for your customers.
Heck yeah, I totally agree.
So I think we're part of a trio on that. There's one thing that I think you might want to explain a little bit more as you think about values. Will you say a little bit more about what values are, how we categorize them, and then maybe we can give an example of why understanding partner values matters so much?
Hey, Ayo, why don't I talk about values and then you talk
Yeah,
about partners?
yeah,
We'll
exactly.
So man, I wish I had like a whiteboard behind me because I'm gonna try to describe it, but my screen is mirrored. So values are really, if you imagine a bullseye of how all of us behave and sort of engage with the world around us, the outside of the bullseye is how we actually act. The sort of next ring in is how we might feel. And then the most inner ring of all is our values. And the values actually direct the sort of outer rings of that bullseye. And they are the aggregate of all of the experiences you've had over your entire lifetime. So the metaphor that I often will use is like, have you ever seen like a river stone that was smooth after it's been in the river for years and years and years? That's kind of how all of us are. We are under these forces every single day that shape and mold us into the humans that we are and the way that we feel and ultimately how we behave out into the world. And what the values compass can help us do is really quickly take a snapshot of that person's shape, both on the individual level as well as on the collective level. And I'm going to turn it over to Ayo because that has massive implications if we can understand what all of the humans in the ecosystem care about.
Yeah, I'll start by saying this, all too obvious, but partners are human too, right? So let that sink in, right? And I think if you think about the fact that partners are human, they're not a company that's faceless or this monolithic entity, but rather humans that you interact with. They ultimately make decisions. And as humans, they seek positive engagement, positive experiences that build connections that ultimately drive loyalty and fuel growth, right? So that's how you have to think about partners. I think that in today's world, these partners also have values, which gets to what Maggie was talking about. And their values vary, right? And oftentimes we kind of think about partners as monolithic entities, but you have to kind of think about the individual values of the humans that are working in that partner organization. And even the organization itself has values, and those values interact. So as I and Deloitte, we often think about how do you craft specialized interactions for your partners, kind of taking into context or into account these values to shape your interactions with them. You can use data analytics, blockchain, and different ways. And these are all things that weren't possible in the past. But I think with new technology, digital innovation in kind of design, you can kind of create these experiences at scale for your partner organization.
Yeah, and I think just to kind of build on what you're saying, one of the best parts about our understanding of values today is that we have 8. There are 8 core ones. It might sound like when you hear the word values, there could be this infinite list or dictionary that, we drop in front of our clients about like, we're going to figure out what makes these people tick. But ultimately what we were able to discover when we did a lot of digging into what academics and really brilliant people that frankly came way before us had done in studying this is there are 8 core values. And just like a regular compass, this is why we call it the values compass, we have cardinal values, sort of the me versus the we, and the known versus the unknown. And then we have sort of intermediate points. So if somebody is equal parts sort of me and unknown driven, sort of an ambitious and curious person, that is all about trying new things. And I won't go through the entire kind of visual representation of what is on the values compass, but the best part I personally think about the values compass is that is incredibly simple when you look at it. I might even go so far as to say elegant in its simplicity, and I don't take credit for that elegance at all. We've had really talented designers that got us there, but it is very complex under the surface. So we can tap into all the complexities of sort of human values, but display it in a really simple way that everybody can understand.
And that's actually one of my favorite things about the values compass, because at the heart of delivering on experience, it's understanding who you're trying to serve, whether that's your partner or your customer or employee. And if you can be thoughtful about what they hold dear, and if you can be empathetic about what matters to them, then you can deliver on a much better experience. And one of the ways I love using partners, and if I think about the businesses that I help on a day-to-day basis, we're helping hotels and we're helping automotives. All of these are franchises, and those are your partners and the people who are responsible on the front line for delivering the experience that you're trying to offer. And the cool thing about the values compass is you can use it to identify or think about how to extend your own brand for your partners. So your partners might actually have different values than you. That's not necessarily an issue. You could be really thoughtful about how you leverage your partner's values to meet a new set of customers that you might otherwise not have aligned with.
Yeah.
Maggie, we were talking just earlier today, and one of the things that you said that stuck with me is how we should be evolving our thinking from moving from demographics and from kind of descriptive variables about you to a more values-based segmentation. How we can be more thoughtful about creating groups around values. Can you hum a few bars on that?
Oh yeah, you have unleashed
I
my
started the orchestra.
here it goes. With my background kind of in brand and sort of digital strategy, I sit with a lot of segmentation, a lot of marketing based segmentation. And ultimately, where a lot of those are rooted is in demographics. So you break up the world and you say, women 25 to 54 with 2 or more kids at home are this. And people over the age of 65 who are retired and empty nesters are this. And what I've discovered as I've run values compasses over all of these different groups is those delineations are not quite discrete. For me personally, I think it can be somewhat destructive for us to look at segmentation based on demographics. Not only because I think it causes us to look only at sort of the face value of who people are as humans, but I think it can cause us to think that somebody's gender or somebody's age is actually indicative of who they are versus just an attribute that sort of physically describes them. So as an example, a 60-year-old in Maine and a 16-year-old in Florida could actually have the exact same values. And so if a brand really wanted to more effectively talk to both of those people, they shouldn't be sending them different messages. They should be talking to them about the values that they share and communicating what they offer that aligns with those values. So not only is I think it's a little bit more reflective of who people are as a human, it can also create massive efficiencies with your marketing messages as well.
Yeah, maybe I can build on that a little bit because I reflected on this whole notion of, I think what you're saying here is challenging an orthodoxy about how we think about segmentation, right? And how we've historically done it. And I wonder in the B2B world where we often segment companies based on revenue or employee size or propensity to buy. What if we had a values dimension to that conversation? What would it look like if we could shape our interactions based on that value segmentation? How would marketing, B2B marketing change based on values, right? So I do think pardon the pun, I think there's a lot of value in using this idea, right, of kind of the core values to shape how you interact with companies, both at the overall organizational level, but also at the individual level within that organization, kind of taking into account the roles that people play and what values they have in their decision making.
Well, it's not lost on me that one of the things that surrounds us today is change and how quickly things are moving and how dramatically we've all been impacted by the events around us. And there have been a lot of examples of it. Values are something that we've always thought of as, to your point, rock being molded by water. Do you want to talk a little bit about how we're seeing the evolution of values, and we can think about it both for consumers and partners?
Yes, I'm glad you brought that up. So the first thing we did as we sort of got into this, I guess we could call it era of uncertainty at this point. It's gone long enough. is we started to investigate values of Americans week on week to see if they were shifting, and if so, how. Our hypothesis going into it was it may actually take a little bit longer for these values to shift than the behavior and the feelings that we are maybe observing in market. Going back to that kind of like bullseye metaphor I talked about earlier. And that was exactly the case. It was a few weeks into sort of the pandemic that we began to see a gradual shift in values. And essentially what we began to see is across all Americans, there were two values that were increasing at the expense of all of the others kind of moving away. And really what we started seeing is an increased desire for control and certainty, which I think if all of us look at ourselves and how we're living today, that makes a lot of sense, as well as an increased desire for caring for others. We thought some of that could be a result of families that all of a sudden were in the same household together. But ultimately where we saw the biggest growth in caring for others actually came from Gen Z. And so the key takeaway we really had there is that technology that sort of connects us, just like we're doing now, is not actually going to substitute for human caring face-to-face interactions. I'm sorry to say, like, as amazing as this platform is, I think all of us still in the future are going to crave sort of face-to-face conversations. And so it has massive implications for how companies can respond, recover, and ultimately thrive. Digital transformation needs to have human elements. There needs to be sort of layers for trust and safety to kind of understand that people have a desire for security and sort of certainty moving forward. And so that's really what we've seen. It's surprising, but it's also not really if we all sort of imagine ourselves there.
I can tell you that the desire for control is apparent in everything we're doing or thinking about in the travel and hospitality industry today.
I think it's apparent for you also with two twins, right?
I don't think I ever have control in my life ever, but it's something I aspire to. But never really thinking about how we're helping people come back to market. Control is huge for people. Safety has become an issue that is important for everyone, no matter what age group you're in, no matter how you're thinking about the world today. Safety is kind of either it's going to be safe and I'm going to come and eat your food or fly in your airplane or stay in your hotel, or it's not. But what's really fascinating to me is not that people expect safety as a baseline. What's really fascinating to me is that desire for control, and people want agency over what they're doing today. And people want agency specifically over how they are feeling safe or treated safely or not. So from a customer perspective, I can absolutely see the personal individual desire for control going up. Ayo, what are you seeing on the B2B side?
Yeah, I think it's interesting, right? I mean, like you said, it's not so surprising, kind of that caring for others and control shifting, but also surprising as well. On the caring for others, I think it's partners are asking kind of to the company that they work with, show me that you care, right? Because for many partners right now, there's a very high feeling of uncertainty. Many of them are struggling with cash and cash flow. They're wondering if they're going to meet their sales goals. So for them, and many of them have actually said, look, I'm not going to do live event, even when we get out of this uncertainty, right? I'm not going to travel, live events and all of that. So for companies, the way you respond to this is kind of think about your digital tools, right? Kind of self-service for your partners, digital collaboration tools, and kind of ways to engage with them virtually. But I think to the point that was made earlier, that they still seek that human experience over and above. So how do you layer kind of understanding where they're coming from, understanding their values, understanding the pain they're feeling? How do you layer in empathy? How do you layer in authenticity in your communications and interactions at every step of that journey? So that's very important. Now, to the second point around control, partners want to know two things. One is, can you show me that I can trust you, but let me take care of myself? So show me that I can trust you to do what's right by me and my business, and show me that I can trust you to take care of me and my customers, right? So a lot of partners are kind of struggling with this, and they want to understand how companies are going to help them through this journey. And again, I think digital tools are helpful, but it's also, and companies are doing this to varying degrees right now, but there's also the notion of training. How do you help your partners through training, and how do you provide incentives for them through this journey? So a lot of things happening out there. Customers really want to know that they can trust the partners, and I think how companies show up now is going to reverberate through the future, right? So how you show up now is going to determine whether or not your partners are loyal to you as you move to recover and to thrive.
I totally agree with that. It's fascinating. We're starting to see these pieces interact a little bit too. Customers are looking at how companies are treating their employees as a measure of whether or not they're trustworthy overall. When you ask people what makes you feel a company is trustworthy, the fact or the way they treat their employees ranks really high on that list. So you start to see the intersection of all these different bodies of humans and what we value all coming to a head. How does the fact that we have chatted our way through 25 minutes already, which is I have to say, Maggie and Ayo, it's a great way to spend a half an hour. Should we attempt to take a few questions?
I say, yeah.
Emily, are there any questions for us?
Yeah, we have a really good question for Ayo. So this is really building on what you just said, but how can companies or leaders show authenticity in how they're communicating about current events with their B2B partners?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. Something I just mentioned right now. I think I'll first say like timing, right? In terms of companies that are successful and empathetic are those that kind of respond immediately, honestly. Saying nothing is not an option, right? Because that's just totally, no statement is a statement in and of itself. So being able to kind of come out boldly upfront to your partners in a very transparent way is important. I think style is the other dimension in terms of being empathetic, right? Understanding where they're coming from, walking in their shoes. And not many people are able to do this effectively, surprisingly enough, but it's important to recognize that many of your partners are not as cash rich as the company that they work with, right? So understanding where they're coming from will be important. And I think last thing and very important is it's not just about the communication, it's also about the actions you take, right? So it's one thing to communicate something, but if you don't follow that up with real tangible action, I see a lot of companies out there, to their credit, have followed up their communications with actions around incentives, support, financing options, and kind of reducing the goals for their partners, et cetera, et cetera. So you need to follow up your statements with action. And I think that's how you respond in a crisis.
I feel like anybody that asked that wants to know a little bit more, next week, Amelia is going to be back to talk with one of our colleagues, Mike Barrett, about how brands can really communicate authentically in times of crisis. So to learn even more, definitely join us next week too.
All right, and Maggie, we've got one for you here maybe, but can you give us an example of a company that is doing this really well today?
Honestly, there's a lot more brands that are doing it not so well. But what I would say is, of all of the brands that I see aren't doing it well, the key is we are in a time where nobody quite is going to get it perfect. We've never been in this situation before. And so making sure that we are flexible, we're ready to embrace almost, I wouldn't call it failure, but mistakes. And I think the way that you avoid those mistakes is you quickly take the pulse of what people are saying, their sentiment in market, and understand how those values have shifted. And then you communicate something that really reflects your brand. So again, to kind of loop it into what we'll talk about next week, I think Mike and Amelia are going to talk about some work we've been doing that's really fascinating called social sensing, where we're actually using an AI enabled sort of social sensing tool to not only help us understand what people are saying today, but what they may be feeling in the future and that sentiment, and helping brands kind of understand how they get ahead of it. So we're not making those mistakes. And essentially we can be most successful in these sort of times of uncertainty. So I know I didn't really answer that because I don't really want to put anybody on blast. There's actually been more mistakes than good ones, but needless to say, success is possible.
All right, so another one here, you've addressed a bit that this is an era of uncertainty at this point. So how can companies continue to support human values, but at the same time, try to cut costs to stay afloat?
In reality, the way that you can be a successful organization these days is you just kind of like make your brand as if it was a successful human, and you operate with integrity, and you ask yourself, yes, of course, there will need to be, I think, cuts financially. But just like any family unit, you have to kind of understand what those cuts are doing and make sure that you treat your employees and your partners with humanity in that time. Understand that we're all kind of going through this. And again, try to, at the end of the day, operate with integrity and align your decisions with values. And I think if you can do that, you'll find that it's hopefully a little bit easier. It's never going to be always the easiest, but that's my take. I don't know, Ashley, what do you think?
It's never anybody's favorite thing to do. I mean, the truth is we're going through a period in time where companies are really struggling, and some industries more than others. I mean, there are some industries where up to 40 or 50% of companies are potentially at risk for bankruptcy, which is a really different position than I'm cutting costs to be more aggressive in how I go to market and reinvest in my future. So I do have a lot of sensitivity around the fact that a lot of these choices are simply hard choices that have to be made. We have recently published a series of papers on how you can take out cost with a human lens. Because at the end of the day, when you do have that little bit of wiggle room, when you're not in back to the wall mode, and you have the ability to take a look at and think about how you can evolve your human experience to become more competitive over time, making cuts with that in mind is hugely beneficial, because one of the things that our research has demonstrated is that companies who deliver on a human experience are significantly more profitable, more likely to grow, bigger, have better revenue than their competitors. So taking out cost with a lens towards how you're going to serve the humans in your ecosystem really does matter. And when you can, you absolutely should. So Maggie, 100% agreement. And if you want more on it, there are 5 new papers out.
Okay.
Awesome. I think we might be at time, actually.
Yeah, we're at time. How time flies, right?
Look at us go, you guys.
Maggie and Ayo, it was really fun. Thanks for joining us, and thanks to everybody who tuned in. You heard Maggie talk to you about the next session, so please join us to welcome Amelia and Mike Barrett as they talk about social sensing, and we'll have more to come. There will be many episodes in the future. We hope you'll grab a glass of wine and join us.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.